every single day, whether it's obstruction of having people come to the table with facts, ignoring subpoenas and the rest. Every single day, the president is making a case. He's becoming self-impeachable in terms of some of the things that he is doing.
Self-impeachable. Anyway, NBC News reports that Pelosi later elaborated on those comments in a meeting with House Democrats, telling her colleagues he's putting out the case against himself. So he's doing our work for us in a certain respect. Speaker Pelosi has consistently tamped down, however, calls for members of our Democratic caucus to actually go ahead and begin impeachment of the president. But her remarks today echoed an argument she made yesterday that President Trump is baiting Congress to act.
Trump is goading us to impeach him. That's what he's doing. Every single day, he's just like taunting, because he knows that it would be very divisive in the country, but he doesn't really care. Just wants to solidify his base. So we can't impeach him for political reasons, and we can't not impeach him for political reasons. We have to see where the facts take us.
It's like someone's cell phone there. And for more, I'm joined by Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California, who serves on the House Judiciary Committee, and Eli Stokols, White House reporter for the LA Times. Thank you, Congressman, as always. Do you think in Trump's head, which is crazy like a fox sometimes, he thinks impeachment is a winner for him if the economy stays strong with his 3.6 jobless rate? If he can go into next year with a good economy and the Democrats chasing after him, he can say, I'm the winner, I'm helping your country, I'm helping you economically, and it's these darn Democrats that are just getting in my way with this impeachment nonsense. Is that his game? Does he really want to be impeached?
Thank you, Chris, for your question. I'm not sure the president thinks 20 steps ahead. I don't actually think he wants to be impeached. And if you look at his various statements, especially on Twitter, it seems like he does not want to be impeached. But with his actions of simply denying every single subpoena request from Congress, that may push us to a place where that's going to be our only option. Right now, we've held the Attorney General in contempt. That is a tool we have. We're going to start escalating the various options we have. But at some point, if we're going to get no information from the administration, we may have to consider impeachment.
It's never clear. We were just talking off air about predicting anything, Eli. You never know. Well, and I'm not sure anybody knew when Clinton was impeached for his misbehavior. And then in the history, it's not even clear now what the final result of that is. Nobody wants to be impeached. Nobody wants that mark against you in history. But it didn't hurt him in real time.
Well, nobody. I mean, you're right. Like, if they were to go down this road, we don't know how it would play politically until you get there. That is true. But I can tell you that there is no way that President Trump wants his name associated with the word impeached. I mean, look how insecure this guy is just about his 2016 electoral victory. That's a big part of the reason why we're in this whole situation, why he can't crack down on Russia, why he's obstructed.
Well, why is he baiting?
Well, I don't know that he's baiting or that he thinks about it that way. I think what the speaker was talking about is the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of Trump, where his actions almost force the reactions that make him go that upset him so much. And so what she's saying is he's behaving in such a way that they have no choice. He's really moved her off of saying we're not pursuing this to now, with the Mueller report coming out and then the president's response to it, she's basically saying, yeah, we as a oversight committee, we don't have much choice.
Well, yesterday, the president's would-be 2020 rival, Senator Elizabeth Warren, one of his potential rivals, renewed her call for impeachment in a lengthy speech on the Senate floor. Here she goes.
This is not a fight I wanted to take on, but this is the fight in front of us now. This is not about politics. This is about the Constitution of the United States of America. We took an oath not to try to protect Donald Trump. We took an oath to protect and serve the Constitution of the United States of America. And the way we do that is we begin impeachment proceedings now against this president.
Meanwhile, the Associated Press reports impeachment talk has emboldened this president's re-election campaign, writing, Trump's team has taken to cheering every call to impeach the president, believing such talk only further motivates Trump supporters and turns off moderates from the Democratic Party, adding the president himself still intends to run as the victim of perceived slights by the media and Democrats, in large part because he believes the aggrieved stance rallies supporters to his defense. How can it not be true? Congressman, this is the catch-22 for the Democrats, because if Trump believes that playing the victim works, if he looks like he's the underdog against the deep state, the unfair media, the unfair partisan Democrats, he rallies the people that voted for him the first time who feel that their votes are being denied them. So, and yet, the Constitution says that Congress should be an equal branch of government.
I agree with Eli. I don't think Trump wants to be impeached. I think what's happening is Trump is trying to not get impeached, which is why he's trying to hide information from the American people. He didn't just stonewall the Judiciary Committee. He stonewalled every single committee trying to get information for the American people to conduct oversight. And that's because he knows that the Mueller report is bad for him. That's why Republicans changed their tune. Republicans voted earlier this year by a vote of 420-0, bipartisan vote, to get the full Mueller report. Now they're saying, no, 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 we don't want it. And why is that? Because they read the redacted version and they realize how bad this is for the president and his enablers.
Do you believe the poll that we got that only 17% of the American people believe that Congress should begin impeachment proceedings, not vote for impeachment, begin proceedings, just 17%. Do you buy that?
Oh, I don't know how much stock I'd put into any single poll, but I think generally the polling shows that a majority of the country believes that the president was not honest in terms of the investigation.
I agree with
and at the same time, a majority is not interested in pursuing impeachment. As the Speaker has said, the facts are kind of all out there in the open. The obstruction, at least, has taken place out in the open. So I think on both sides of this, a lot of folks
That's what blows people's minds, including mine. The fact that the president can execute what are clearly impeachable obstruction of justice moves, trying to fire Mueller, firing Comey, all this stuff in broad daylight. And yet, the public goes, well, since he didn't broad daylight, it must be sort of legal or something. Congressman, thank you so much, Ted Lieu of California, for coming on. Eli Stokols, of course, from the LA Times.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.